Cris Putnam is our very first speaker this morning to get us off and rolling. He is an author. He has spoken across the country on a number of times. He's authored a number of different books. And so I want you to welcome Cris this morning as he comes here to the platform of Prophecy in the News. Cris, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Gary. Good morning. Let's see if I can get this all going here. First, I thought I would show you the video for the new book that Tom Horn and I have written called On the Path of the Immortals, just to give you a little sample of what that's about. I think they can play the video for me from back there.
Now we're on our way to the petroglyphs. There are some strange images that are there.
Yeah. I saw it with the naked eye. Yeah. Did you see it? The orb. I saw an orb with the naked eye. What is that?
In 2012, they shocked the world when they predicted Pope Benedict's resignation 1 year in advance.
Breaking news, Pope Benedict XVI announces his resignation.
Yeah, it is the first time in centuries a pope has stepped down.
And the very latest on the Pope's startling resignation yesterday, the first time in 600 years a pope has done this.
In 2013, they uncovered the mysteries of Mount Graham, the Lucifer device, and the Vatican's secret plan for the arrival of an alien savior. For the last 24 months, Tom Horn and Cris Putnam have been working behind the scenes on their most guarded project and greatest discovery yet. Mount Graham in Arizona is said to be a portal, and the Jesuits admit they are monitoring something there that is approaching the Earth. But as the Vatican knows and the authors just uncovered, this mountain is not the only gateway to another dimension. Now, in their new book, On the Path of the Immortals, Tom Horn and Cris Putnam set out with cameras and field investigators to document the most astonishing evidence of those behind the veil. Armed with inside intelligence from the native peoples, they unearth chilling evidence of what the Bible says about sacred locations and the giant beings that await their time from within.
They claimed that they could actually conjure light ships down, UFOs, aliens.
So what would have caused these ancient Pueblo Anastasi Indians to have departed this area with such great haste?
We don't know why they never finished completion of the Sun Temple.
Many of them escaped right through some of these mountains, some of these old Anasazi ruins.
Travel with internationally acclaimed investigative authors of Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana to learn the truth behind a secret so fantastic that it took 2 years and thousands of miles of research to document what has been kept hidden from the public by elitists and intellectuals who are planning mankind's assimilation under a coming savior.
Here's the 6-ton giant our Indian guide told us about. And there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
One whom the prophet Daniel foresaw as an alien god. On the Path of the Immortals.
All right. So that's the promo video for the book. Now I'm going to try to change slides. All right, it works. So who are these immortals that Tom Horn and I are on the path of, running around in the Indian Territory and all these places? How do we get from the Bible to doing something crazy like that, right? So that's what we're going to talk about this morning. I'm going to try to connect all the dots for you just a little bit. It's a lot of material to cover in an hour, so they're going to wave at me at 5 minutes till to remind me in case I'm running behind a little bit. But we're going to try to get through it all, and I'm going to try to connect the dots between the biblical text and why we're running around in Sedona, Arizona looking at orbs and crazy stuff like that. But it does connect in an interesting way, and it really connects to Bible prophecy. And the immortals are really the thing that connects it. So let's talk about what I mean by that. I'm going to give you like the thesis statement for the whole presentation right at the beginning. And just kind of keep that in your mind. And if you're a note taker, this is really the whole thing in a condensed format. So although angels and supernatural beings play a pivotal role in Bible prophecy. What's commonly assumed about them is often drastically oversimplified, and often it's misleading. And we'll unpack what I mean by that in just a minute. So with a proper understanding of the biblical seraphim and watchers, the plumed serpent gods of the Mesoamerican Aztecs, Mayans, and Incans appear to be fallen rebel immortals, accepting worship as gods, and their influence is still felt today through the New Age movement and the ancient alien belief. So they play pivotal roles in Bible prophecy. If you look at in the book of Revelation, for instance, we see the trumpet judgments in chapter 8. The 4 angels kill a third of mankind in chapter 9. The angelic war of Michael versus the dragon in chapter 12. And the 7 plagues and bowls of wrath in chapters 15 and 16. This is just a sample to support that idea. All these things are carried out by angels if you read the book of Revelation. In fact, there's more if the slides will change. It's not changing. There it goes. So these 4 angels that have come out from the river Euphrates is an interesting thing that Tom and I talk about in the book, because there do seem to be places, specific places, where these beings emerge from. This would be one example in the Bible. Another would be when the 5th trumpet judgment happens and all those crazy locust / scorpion beings come flying out of the abyss. And that's another instance of a specific location being opened by an immortal being, an angel, and then a horde comes out in judgment. So we see that these places, these portal areas, and these beings appear quite often in Bible prophecy. We unpack quite a few in the book. And this is just a few examples to show you what I'm talking about. Now, interestingly, an angel also flies over and shares the gospel with the whole world in the book of Revelation. So it's not just judgment, it's not just bad things that they're doing. In Bible prophecy, we see that they have a role sharing the gospel as well. So, they also play a role in the rapture. And we have an archangel that blows the trumpet, right at the rapture. So they're all throughout Bible prophecy. We see these beings that we call angels. Now, what you're going to find out right now is I don't really like the fact that we call like this whole, I don't know what you would call it, a species, but it's a type of being, a type of entity. We label them angels. And when you go to seminary, you have a systematic theology textbook, and they call it angelology, the study of angels. And all these divine beings that we see in heaven are called angels. That's really a misnomer. What they really are, and what I mean by immortals, is that the term immortal means they're imperishable. They don't die. They're exempt from death. That's what the word immortal means. And I think this is a much more accurate term that covers all these divine beings than the word angel that we use in English. And now, just to make a distinguishing thing, some people think when you start saying that they're immortal, that you're putting them on the same level as God. But that's not so, because God is eternal in that he has no beginning. He's always been, okay? Now, immortal is somewhat different because they could have a beginning. God's also immortal, but he's also eternal. Immortal beings are not eternal, okay? They have a beginning. They're created beings, okay? So that's the big distinction. And Psalm 145 actually handles God. He mentions creating these beings. So it's in Scripture that they are created. So while they were not intended to die, they do have a beginning. In Psalm 148, we see 2 classes of immortal beings. We see the malak, and that in English gets translated to angel, the Hebrew term malak, and then the Hebrew term sabah, which is often translated hosts. It's not changing. There it goes. praise ye all his angels, praise him all you hosts. Those are the two terms, malak in Hebrew and then hosts, sabah. And that term host is also a term for divine beings, but it's also used for military. It's a military term for military orders. So you get the idea that this term malak in Hebrew, it's really a term that means messenger. An angel is a Greek transliteration of a Greek term that means messenger. And often these can be human or divine. They can be beings from heaven, or they could be human messengers. So that's why I don't really like the term angel. But this, shows you that they're created beings. He created them forever and ever. They're designed not to die. So that's in Psalm 148, verse 2, and verses 5 and 6. So that really just distinguishes them as immortal beings. So I want to cover this idea of transliteration versus translation. And this is important because we're going to find out that some of these beings, rather than translate the Hebrew or the Greek, they actually just transliterate it. And it kind of masks the true meaning in some passages. Transliteration, sometimes Bible translators don't translate a term at all, but they just spell it in English the way it sounds in the original language, okay? And the term seraphim or cherubim, those are examples of transliterations. That's the way it sounds in Hebrew, cherubim. Okay, or cherub, cherubim, the plural is the I-M sound. Another example that everybody's familiar with is the word baptisma. It's a Greek word, and in Greek, it actually means immerse. Okay, so this is where the big debate came in when the Baptists said, well, you're not doing it right when you're sprinkling them on the head because the word means immerse in Greek, and it really does. And the problem is English Bible translators, rather than translate it, baptisma, to the word immerse, they chose to transliterate it. So we have this word baptism. It's really not an English word. It's a transliteration of a Greek term, baptisma. So if we were to translate it to English, all those places where it says baptism in the New Testament should say immerse. That's really what it means. So it's kind of ambiguous. Why did they choose to transliterate it rather than translate it? It's kind of confusing. Same thing happens with the word angel. And this is why I don't really like it as a type of being, because I don't think that's accurate. It's a transliteration of the Greek angelo, which means messenger. And there's plenty of instances where just regular human beings are messengers, in the New Testament even. So it's hard to tell, is it talking about a divine being or is it talking about a human being? What does it mean? And that's because this term angel is terribly imprecise. The Hebrew term malak is the same thing. It also means messenger. But when you see it translated in the Old Testament, it'll often have the word angel there, okay? Which is really confusing because it jumps forward to the New Testament and translates a Greek word and then imposes it on the Hebrew back in the Old Testament. This is what English Bible translators have done. I think, with the idea of making it easier for us to read, but in a way they've masked the true meaning in some places. Both can mean human or supernatural beings. And that's why it's really not a very precise term. Trying to change. Okay. So here's a scholar, a biblical scholar of the Old Testament, S.A. Meyer, and I thought his comment was very applicable to this situation. The translation of malak, that's the Hebrew term for messenger, by angel in English Bibles obscures the ancient Israelite perception of the divine realm, where the English angel is the undifferentiating term for God's supernatural assistance. Malak could originally be applied only to those assistants whom God dispatched on missions as messengers. So like in Daniel, when Daniel was praying and Gabriel shows up, he brings him a message from God, right? And he looks like a human being. And we see this, the Malak show up, the angel of the Lord shows up. When Abraham, he fed three men walk up, they look like humans. So the idea with these messengers is, they look like us. They're not terribly scary looking. Sometimes they're really glowing and bright in appearance, like at the tomb after Jesus' resurrection. But they look like human beings. And a lot of times they're even mistaken for regular human beings. But we see quite a range of beings in the Bible. But what I want to really hammer home is this word angel. It's a job description. It's not a type of being. Angel means messenger. And so it's really only one of these types of divine beings that God dispatches to come bring messages to humans. And I think that's, they look like us and they talk like us and we can relate to them. So they're rather, conventional looking. and approachable. So angel means messenger. Sabah, host, is a military term, often translated armies in the Old Testament. And it overlaps with angels because we see some of the angels often fight. I mean, in Revelation 12, right? Michael and his angels fight Satan, the dragon, and his angels, right? That's a battle. So they do serve a military function. There's also this term watcher, which applies to these same sorts of divine beings. And it's used in the Old Testament in Daniel chapter 4, 17, 23. And it also appears throughout the extra biblical literature, like the books of Enoch and Jasher, and these extra biblical books that appeared in that intermediate period between the Old Testament and New Testament. It's a really common word used by the Jews, watcher. And it's generally applied to these divine beings. Cherubim. Now here's a transliteration. And there's over 67 instances of this in the Old Testament. But these are not messengers, okay? You know, the reason why this word appears so often is because they're on top of the Ark of the Covenant. But these don't look like humans necessarily, and they're not terribly approachable. If we saw one of them, we'd probably be scared. And seraphim, very similar, another transliteration. Okay, this is not a translation, but yet English Bibles will use the word cherubim, they use the word seraphim. They really haven't translated the word. They're just transliterating it. So the true meaning of it gets lost in that process somewhat, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. Okay, so first let's look at angels. Angels and messengers, we've talked about that a little bit already. They look like human beings. You know, we see them with Abraham in Genesis 18. And in Hebrews, this is a really interesting verse. Don't neglect hospitality, because through this, some have received angels as guests without knowing it. You know, some translations, many have received angels unaware. You know, right? So people have had dinner with these guys and not even realized that they were supernatural, immortal beings, right? That's what it's telling us. So they really do look like humans. They look like us. Now, here's one in Daniel, you know, where I said sometimes they are a little more supernatural looking. This description, his body was like turquoise, his face was like the appearance of lightning, his eyes were like touches of fire. So it seems to me they can kind of turn this on and off at will. You know, they can kind of show you what they are when they want to. But they're very bright, shining type beings. You see that in the Gospels as well. So here we have the military aspect of the angels I've mentioned, Revelation 12. There was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels. In Daniel, this is one of those revealing passages that I think kind of gives you a peek behind the curtain of what's going on in the divine realm. But the prince of Persia, the prince of the kingdom of Persia, stood before me for 21 days. Do you remember when this is? Daniel's praying. And Gabriel shows up and he says, I wanted to come answer your prayer earlier, but the prince of Persia withheld me for 21 days. So it sounds like he's coming to see Daniel, and he gets in a battle with a rebel angel, and he holds him off for 21 days, and then Michael comes and helps him, and he's able to defeat him, and he gets to Daniel. So what's going on there? Well, if you think about the context of the book of Daniel, what's going on? Well, Daniel was taken by the Babylonians, right? Nebuchadnezzar and them sacked Jerusalem. He's in captivity in Babylon, but what happens? King Cyrus of what? Persia comes, defeats the Babylonians, and sets the Jews free and lets them go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple. So the prince of Persia withheld me for 21 days. What's going on? These angels that represent nations, the prince of Persia, the prince of Babylon, they fight, and then Persia takes over. Does it give you the idea that the wars on earth and the military skirmishes and the politics on earth are kind of a response to what's going on up here? Do you see that? So there's like these nations are changing places and these princes are battling up in the heavens. I think that's part of what's going on. And we see a little peek of that right there because it shifts. In the book of Daniel, you see the shift from Babylon to Persia. And half of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic and half of it's written in Hebrew. And it's right where that shift occurs. It's really interesting. So they're ordered in ranks, I believe, because you remember the passage with the rapture, in Thessalonians, it said that the archangel. So that tells me that there must be ranks of these beings. They're kind of in a military form, and some of them have a higher rank. They're archangels. There it is in 1 Thessalonians 4. Now, do female angels exist? This is a controversial question, and typically, a year ago, I would have told you they didn't. And when I started researching this book, I really started looking in the Bible and digging into all the possibilities with an open mind, and I changed my mind on that. And the reason is that you see in the book of Zechariah. But here's the conventional wisdom. This is a book, Sense and Nonsense About Angels and Demons. It's a quote by a scholar I respect. Angels can appear in bodily form, but they don't come in male and female varieties. Most of them do appear as males in the Bible. But check out this verse in Zechariah chapter 5. I looked up and saw, and look, 2 women coming forward, and the wind was in their wings. And they had wings like those of a stork, and they lifted up the basket between the earth and the sky. If you remember, in the basket is wickedness, and they're flying. And these 2 women are flying it to Babylon, I believe. But we have women with wings flying a basket on a divinely appointed mission. Doesn't that sound like angels? I mean, where else in the Bible do you even see humans with wings? This is probably about the only place I can think of where you see the classic formula of what an angel looks like in most of the paintings, and they're women. So for that reason, I don't think you can exclude the possibility that there are female angels. I think that we see 2 of them described right there. So for that reason, I would say there are possibly female angels. And also, I thought about that argument that Jesus used about in heaven they won't marry, they won't have children. But why would that even be a coherent statement if it wasn't possible? Why would he bother to say it? So it seems like the angels maybe do have male and female counterparts for those reasons. So it's a little tricky syncing this up here. Let's see. Who are the watchers? Now, I mentioned those. I said they do appear in the book of Daniel. Most of us probably are familiar with them from First Enoch, the sons of God in Genesis 6 who came down, and the whole Nephilim story and all that. Those are generally called the watchers. But what I found is not all watchers are fallen beings. It's not just them, because Daniel's talking about holy watchers. Behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. So it's not just a term for the fallen beings that you hear about in Genesis 6. Really, there's these sons of God are the watchers that you hear about, the Benai Elohim. So you do see them in Daniel. Now, this is a really interesting passage in Daniel 4. The sentence on Nebuchadnezzar was by decree of the watchers. And that's when Nebuchadnezzar, he was cursed to be like an animal for a number of years. And a lot of people think Daniel took care of him. But it was actually the watchers that imposed that sentence on him. Really interesting. And that kind of goes hand in hand with this idea of a divine council. And we've talked about that a little bit in my books. Me and Tom have written about that. But it does appear that God has a council of these beings that make decisions and kind of rule over the nations, especially in the Old Testament. Psalm 82 is a good example of that if you want to look at it sometime. Here we go again in Enoch. Now, Gabriel said to the Lord, proceed against the bastards and the reprobates, against the children of fornication, destroy the children of fornication, the children of the watchers. So here we have a reference in a pseudepigraphal book of Enoch, referencing back to Genesis 6, where we have the children of the watchers, the Nephilim, the men of renown that it speaks of. And they are said to be cursed. And the book of Enoch says that because they are hybrids between these watchers and human women, that they are not eligible to resurrect at the end of days, at the final resurrection of the great white throne. So they were cursed to haunt the earth as evil spirits. And most of the Jews would say this is the origin of demons, that they think that they are the spirits of the Nephilim that were killed in the flood, because they're not eligible to resurrect, and so their ghosts or their spirits haunt the earth. Now, I don't know if that's completely biblical, but that's what the Jews believe. That's one possibility for the origin of demons. Really controversial. The Bible doesn't tell us much about where demons come from. I cover several theories in my book, The Supernatural Worldview, and there's several that you might not be aware of. But this is, a reference to the sons of God, the Nephilim, Genesis 6. I'm sure most of you are familiar with that. And so that's attributed to the Watchers as well. Now, interestingly, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see a description of one of these Watchers in distinctly reptilian terms. They appear to be scary looking, at least some of them. So here we have, this is the 4Q544 you see there. That's what cave it was found in. A lot of the biblical books were found there, and this is one of the extra biblical texts, but we see someone describing a Watcher who was like a viper. His face was like that of an adder, it says, a venomous snake. So it's completely consistent with the Israelite view of what Watchers are to see them as partly reptilian-looking beings. So this is really ancient stuff. This goes to about 200 BC or so, this text. And that kind of leads me to a little aside I was going to do. You think about a serpent, a talking serpentine being that looks like a snake. What about Genesis 3, right? Eve was tempted by the nakash, is the Hebrew term. And most of us think about a talking snake. And that's one of the reasons biblical faith kind of bothered me before I became a Christian. I would think about this story about the whole world being led into sin by a talking snake. As someone who was kind of skeptical at that time, I was thinking, well, wait a minute. Snakes don't even have vocal cords. How can a snake talk? And maybe it was telepathy. You come up with all these crazy ideas. Well, it turns out it's not necessary that it was a talking snake, all right? And this is from a Hebrew scholar, Michael Heiser, taught me. I took some Hebrew with him, and I studied it in seminary. But in Hebrew, this word nakash doesn't necessarily mean a conventional snake. The Hebrew nouns, it means snake or serpent. But as a verb, it can mean to practice divination. What you find in Hebrew is that words can mean drastically different things depending on the grammar and how it's used. English is the same way. Some of our words mean drastically different things. But as a verb, it's to practice divination. As an adjective, it means bright or brazen or shining. Okay, so this is all the same word. It can mean all these things. Now, what's interesting in Hebrew grammar is that you could take an adjective, and they call it substantivizing. You make it something of substance. You take an adjective and turn it into a noun. Okay, so instead of shining, you could turn it into something of substance, turning it into a noun. It would be shining one or brazen one. So it's actually a valid translation. This word nakash that most of us think of as being a talking snake could mean brazen one or shining serpent one or something of that nature. Dr. Heiser is pretty blunt about it. He says Eve was not talking to a snake. She was speaking to a bright, shining, upright being who was serpentine in appearance and who was trying to bewitch her with lies. Okay? So if you think about these watcher angels, having the appearance of a viper, looking like a snake, and seeing that in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's not so hard to imagine that maybe that was one of these type of beings that Eve was even used to seeing. Because it also used to bother me that she wasn't even surprised. You think about it, she's out and a snake just starts talking to her. She doesn't jump back, go, whoa. Seemed like it was a common thing almost. It was just, they carried on a conversation. So maybe she was used to seeing them. I don't know. But the fact that it talked to her and she didn't seem too terribly shocked by it and was able to convince her tells me that it probably was something she had seen before maybe. So I'm thinking it's one of these immortal beings that's serpentine in appearance. And I don't think it's any controversy that this really was the devil appearing to her because the book of Revelation kind of connects it to the ancient serpent, and it mentions that. But I think it really is more likely that we're looking at a serpentine, upright being that's somewhat humanoid. It makes a lot of sense to me. Who are the cherubim? We'll move on to them. As I mentioned, they're mentioned many times because of the Ark of the Covenant in that description. But a Hebrew lexicon will define it as an order of angelic beings. Now, do you see the problem there? This is what drives me crazy. Angels are messengers. Are cherubim messengers? No, they're not. And in fact, you know, if they sent one of these down as a messenger, it would probably freak most people out, right? Here's a picture an artist did. We see it has a human face, and then it has a lion and an ox, and so and an eagle. So you have they're chimeras. They're part animal, part human. These are not the kind of things that you'd want to send down as a messenger to someone. I think it would probably scare them to death. But Ezekiel did see them. I think that's what you see in the wheels, where Ezekiel's talking about that. And it's a pretty freaky description. So let's move on. So here we're in Ezekiel, in the midst of the likeness of the four living creatures, and there was appearance of human form, and each had 4 faces, okay? And that's pretty weird. I don't think that's the kind of thing you'd send down to reassure someone. And in Revelation chapter 4, we see these described as living creatures as well. And you notice there's some difference in the description in Ezekiel and Revelation. And I think that these beings can kind of perhaps change their form at will. Maybe they're shapeshifters of some sort, but they do seem to go between human and animal, and it's a little bit ambiguous what all they can do. But the cherubim are usually guardians. If you remember when Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, he put a cherub as the guardian with a sword, right? And he said that, I don't want you to go in and eat of the tree of life and get stuck in the sinful state. So in a way, death was actually a blessing to Adam and Eve, in the sense that God didn't want them to live forever in a sinful, fallen state. So death, in a sense, was an escape from that, and a way to be redeemed. They're also guardians of Yahweh's throne. That's what we see with the wheels, and they're all around the throne room of God. In Ezekiel, God's throne room is basically coming down in a vision. So all these seraphim and cherubim are there too. It's a vision of the throne room of God. But this is another interesting thing. Satan seems to be a fallen cherub. In Ezekiel 28, there's these 2 parallel passages in the prophets. Isaiah 14, it's speaking to the king of Tyre, the king of Babylon, and then Ezekiel 28 speaking to the king of Tyre. But it seems like the prophet goes beyond the king to the power behind him. And in both descriptions, he seems to be talking about somebody that's not the king of Babylon or the king of Tyre, probably the devil. And Ezekiel 28, I think, is pretty conclusively that way because of the language that it uses and where it places him. You were in Eden, the garden of God, and every precious stone was your adornment. That's what Ezekiel says. Now, who else was in Eden? Other than that Nakash that we just talked about, right? You were anointed the guardian cherub, and I placed you on God's holy mountain. Now, this isn't the guard, I don't think that God put there to keep Adam and Eve out. I think this might have even been before the garden. It's not terribly clear where this was on the mountain of God, but it says he cast him down from that mountain and judges him. In the abundance of your trading, they filled in the midst of your violence. You sinned, and I cast you as a profane thing from the mountain of God, and I expelled you, the guardian cherubim, from the midst of the stones of fire. So here we have a fallen cherubim, okay? So they're not all holy. We have one, at least in this instance, that we see that are fallen. And I think that it makes sense that any of these classes of beings could fall. We could have a fallen seraphim, and that's where we're going to go next. We could have fallen cherubim, fallen angels. And the other thing we want to keep in mind is, although we have a lot revealed in Scripture, God didn't tell us that everything necessarily. I mean, he could have created other classes of strange beings that we have no knowledge of. He didn't promise us that he was going to tell us everything he ever did. I mean, so there could be untold numbers of weird creatures out there that God created that we have no idea about. I mean, and maybe this explains some of the weird things that people see and they think are aliens and all those sorts of things. I don't know, but we should at least be open to that possibility. So, who are the cherubim? Are these little cute babies? I forgot. This is what you see in Renaissance art and Baroque art, but these are actually called the putti in Italian. They have nothing to do with the cherubs, okay? You see the difference? Cute little baby flying around, and then a fierce lion-looking creature. Not the same thing. Very much a misnomer. So here, now we're going to the seraphim. So this is another transliteration, like I said. It's not an English translation, so it's a little confusing. But this is one of these instances where the transliteration versus translation issue really comes into sharp focus. So you see, these are in the throne room of God. They're singing, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." 6 wings, okay? But what do they look like, these six-winged creatures? You know, a lot of our artwork, if you see the one with wings right there, this is when he's putting the burning coal in Isaiah's mouth. He says, I'm a man of unclean lips, I'm not worthy, and he cleanses his sins by putting this burning coal in his tongue. You remember that? But he looks very much like a human being, doesn't he? Really does. And you know, and we're really comfortable seeing these winged humans because they look like us and they're not too scary. But seraphim do not look like that. Let's look at where this comes from. See that snake on the pole? Remember when the Israelites were cursed and God sent the snakes in to bite them, and Moses put the snake on the pole? If they looked at that, they wouldn't be poisoned. Well, the word used for that snake on the pole is seraph. Okay? The plural is seraphim. Okay? That's the word in the Torah. And the Lord sent fiery serpents among the people. That's the word seraphim. Okay? And the Lord said to Moses, make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. That's the word seraph in Hebrew. He led you through the great terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions. There we go in Deuteronomy. Again, seraph, same word in Hebrew. So these are actually, it's the same term that gets transliterated seraphim. So seraph is a fiery serpent in Hebrew. That's the way most of the time you see it translated when it's translated. Okay? But it's transliterated as an order of angelic beings, seraphim, in Isaiah 6:2 and verse 6. And that's a little confusing. It's translated in the same book of Isaiah as flying fiery serpent. In the same book by the same author. Okay? In the Hebrew text, there's no difference. That's what I'm trying to get you to see. It's only in English translations that you get this difference. So if you were reading the Hebrew text of Isaiah 6:2 and verse 6, you'd see the same word seraph as you see later in Isaiah 14, rejoice not, O Philistia, all of you, the rod struck you is broken from the serpent's root and from the adder, and its fruit from the seraphim. Be a flying fiery serpent. That's the same term that you see in the throne room of God as you see in Isaiah 14. It's just that in the throne room of God, the English Bible translators chose to transliterate it rather than translate it. Now, why is that? I don't know. I find that a little bit problematic. Here again is Isaiah 30. You see the same term, flying fiery serpent. It's actually seraphim in Hebrew, same term, and same author. So it's the English Bible translators have kind of made this confusing for us, and they've kind of censored the Bible in a sense. And I think maybe, you know, they're thinking these are the unfallen ones in the throne room of God, so maybe they're not serpentine. But the name seraph means serpent, so it's really hard to get out of that. So it's almost like they're uncomfortable with the idea that anything reptilian or serpent would be in heaven, but it's more likely that they look like that than they look like that piece of artwork that we saw where they looked human. Now, this looks like a monster, right? And it's scary. And, you know, it might necessarily be like that, but they're fiery flying serpents is what it says in Isaiah. And so this is, you know, biblical scholars. This is the Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, a really scholarly resource. And, you know, the seraphim are now generally conceived of as winged serpents with certain human attributes, okay? That's really the consensus amongst Hebrew scholars of what this term means. Now, I really got interested in following this because you start seeing the worship of things that could be described as flying serpents all over the world, and especially in Egypt. This was a canufus, and you know it's the same thing. It's got wings. It's a flying serpent, and you know it's right there. The neighbors of the Israelites. But if you look all around the world, you see things like dragons. The Chinese worship serpentine flying dragons, right? All over the world. And, you know, the way I think about the Bible and these sort of things, you know, I think these things are real. And it doesn't surprise me that fallen seraphim that rebelled against God, just like the cherub did in Ezekiel 28, would go to these other nations and represent themselves as gods, okay? And that's kind of the trajectory that Tom and I are on when we start looking at what these Indians believe, and we're going down to Mesoamerica. So who else built the pyramids and worships flying serpents? Well, it's not much of a stretch when you start looking at Quetzalcoatl and these huge pyramids down in Mesoamerica. They, you know, just like the Egyptians, around the same time, Around 1400 BC in Teotihuacan, in central Mexico, Teotihuacan, I think is how you say it, they were already starting this. They were already worshiping what they call the plumed or the feathered serpent god. Okay, Quetzalcoatl is a prime example, but they built huge pyramids and they built temples for them, and it's really interesting that all these Indians down there, without exception, had their own flying plumed serpent gods, and we're going to unpack several of them. But I really think, and this is the trajectory that we took, is that these are fallen seraphim that came down and convinced these people they were gods. And if you look at what they did, most of these American tribes were using human sacrifice, blood sacrifice, to these plumed serpent gods. And doesn't that make a lot of sense given the fact that we believe they are fallen entities, that they would want human blood and demand human life? And it really all works together quite well when you look at it. The Temple of the Feathered Serpent, that's one of these pyramids. Now, if you see that the picture in the middle on the bottom and the second one over, that's Quetzalcoatl. I mean, he looks fierce. That doesn't look like anything that you'd want to get into a conversation with. So it's very much like, these fierce-looking seraphim that these Mesoamericans, and they have no contact with the Israelites. They haven't talked to the Egyptians about the Canufis. They haven't talked to the Chinese about their flying serpent dragon gods. But isn't it interesting, all over the world, people come to these same conclusions and are worshiping flying snakes and building pyramids. And with no contact, no internet, but they all came to the same conclusions. And I think it's because there really was something there. And maybe it looked like a flying snake. Maybe it really was. I don't know. But there it is. The Incans had the Amaru, the Aztecs had Quetzalcoatl, and the Mayans have Kulkan. And it's basically all the same sort of thing. Here's a scholarly book by Diana Ferguson, Tales of the Plumed Serpent. And it's just ubiquitous throughout South America. All these Indian tribes all worshipped flying plumed serpent gods. The Incan Amaru. Here's a picture of what one would look like. Okay, it's kind of a chimera. It's got animal parts, snake parts, and it's got wings. All right, really interesting. The Incan main god is Viracocha. Now, he looks like a man in most of the artwork, but some of the artwork has him looking like an Amaru. Now, interestingly, Viracocha, we have records of him. He actually chose the Amaru as his symbol, as they would have a stone statue that would represent the leader, and he chose the Amaru. So it's like, even if there was a human being who was Viracocha, if there was really a man that did it, he chose this as his thing. So I don't know if he was really one of these things, or if he could translate, or if he was an immortal or not, but I get the idea that perhaps he could appear as a man or as a serpent, and that he was one of these immortals. And this is what the Incans were worshiping down there. There's a lot of strange things in Peru that point to something supernatural going on. Of course, many of you are probably familiar with the Nazca lines. These are the people that did that, right? And these are only visible from an airplane. And some of them are really intricate. And the same people are doing this. So who are they doing these for? If you could only see them from a plane flying over, at 10,000 feet or something, what are they doing why are they going through all this trouble? What are they expecting to come from the sky? And of course, our friend L.A. Marzulli has been down there in Peru on the trail of the Nephilim. And I've visited with L.A. And I was in, I think, Watchers 4 or 5, one of those. But he's found all these strange skulls, that have an extended cranial capacity that, he thinks that might be evidence of the biblical Nephilim, of giants down in Peru. And they all have mythology about Viracocha creating giants, Quetzalcoatl created giants. It's really interesting that all these things kind of correspond. So Quetzalcoatl would be the Aztec version of the plumed serpent god. And you can see here's an artwork of Quetzalcoatl looking very fierce, but quite similar to the other ones. A snake with feathers, wings, a plumed serpent with some animal features, same sort of thing. But you look at the codexes in the the oldest artwork we have where they tried to represent him, some pictures have him looking like a man dressed up in a costume like you see over here. And then other pictures having him looking like a plumed serpent completely. So giving the impression that maybe he appeared in both forms. I don't really know, but they depicted him in both forms. Both of these are pictures of Quetzalcoatl. Interesting. And here again is the temple of the plumed serpent. And you have the rain god is the first one with the big round eyes you see. And then here's the plumed serpent god head in the middle, and then the rain god. And it just alternates like that all the way up the steps of this huge pyramid in Teotihuacan. And that's a close-up, so you can see that face a little better. He's not too cute, really. Why would someone choose that to be their god? And then offer human sacrifice and blood to it. It's not the kind of thing you just pick on your own, is it? You get the idea that this thing came down and forced them to do it, wouldn't you think? I mean, I don't think anybody would willingly want that to be their god, a flying snake that demanded human sacrifice and things like that. So the Mayans, we have this big thing about the Mayan calendar and all that. Everybody's familiar with the Mayans nowadays, but they also had their plumed serpent god. And there was some overlap. They would call him Quetzalcoatl, and they worshiped Quetzalcoatl, but they also called him Kulkan. That was their main name, the Mayans. Same sort of thing. Here's a picture that the Mayans have developed of him. Same kind of thing. Plumed serpent god with animal features, kind of human-looking face. Really scary-looking creature there. Not the kind of thing you would call a messenger, but definitely a god to the Mayans. And here's their temple to Kulkan, and right there in Mexico, in the Mayan area. Okay, here we go. This is in Chichen Itza, and they worship their flying fiery serpent god, I would say. And I hope this sort of explains the thesis at the start, where I said, we kind of misunderstand this whole angelic realm. And if you really understand what seraphim and cherubim really are, as a flying serpent, bringing it forward into this context in Mesoamerica makes a lot more sense. If you think of it looking like a man and, with wings as a seraphim, it's hard to imagine that. But then you see they're worshiping plumed flying serpents, which is exactly really what a seraphim is in the Bible. So that kind of brings it all around. Now, how is their influence still being felt today? Well, in the New Age movement, a lot of people don't realize the New Age movement really started around 1971. This guy, Tony Scher, wrote this book, Lord of Dawn. It's really Quetzalcoatl, Lord of God, the plumed serpent god of Mexico. It's got several titles, but it's been several editions have been addressed. But what he did, he predicted a planetary alignment in 1987. And they called that the harmonic convergence. And this was a huge event in the New Age movement. And it really was based on this book. And he set this date. And this guy, Jose Alaguirares, popularizes this as a worldwide synchronized meditation event, okay? And in Sedona, Arizona, which is one of the places I visited in researching this, a lot of people gathered around this rock called Bell Rock. And it was in the video at the beginning. If you remember, I was talking about somebody conjuring down light ships and things of that nature. It's that rock right there in the distance where I'm standing in front of it. It's called Bell Rock because it has a bell shape. But in 1987, during this harmonic convergence event that the New Age movement had, everybody's meditating. Thousands of people will flock to Arizona, and they gathered around Bell Rock. And the story was that some gigantic alien mothership was going to bust loose out of the rock and fly up. Okay, of course that didn't happen, but they still gathered, and still thousands of them were there. And really interesting, they connect it to what? The return of Quetzalcoatl, the plumed serpent god. So that's the Mayan calendar on the right. And here's a book by kind of a New Age author, Daniel Pitchbeck, 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. So the harmonic convergence didn't really happen, but it really was the big event that got the New Age movement off the ground, even though some people would say it's a failure. I guess they didn't think so. But Sedona basically became the Mecca of the New Age movement after that. But then, it's all connected really to this Mesoamerican Quetzalcoatl belief is what I'm trying to see, because the whole harmonic convergence date was based on that book about Quetzalcoatl. And then it got pushed forward to 2012. He didn't come back then either. That we know of, right? So if you heard Tom talking about an Indian tribe that disappeared, I don't know, some of you are probably familiar with these Anasazi Indians. That's a word really that comes from Navajo, the Navajo language. And the Navajo, in a simple form, it means ancient enemy. And the Navajo would think of these people as their ancient enemies. Some translators say ancient alien enemy. And this came from a medicine man, a Navajo medicine man. But these Indians vanished off the face of the earth all of a sudden, overnight, in a way that's very mysterious. Tom went out and visited a lot of the ruins there. And some of the things that are telling about the way they vanished. In the ancient world, nobody had a refrigerator, right? To preserve food was quite a task. You basically had to kill what you were going to eat daily, or you couldn't keep meat. The only way you could keep it would be to salt treat it. Think of things like country ham and things of that nature. Well, salt was very valuable. It was like gold to Indians and people back then to have a bag of salt. Well, when these Anasazi vanished, they left their salt behind. Okay, we found bags of salt in their things. We find their clothes. Something happened. They didn't even gather their stuff. Okay, they just were gone. Thousands of people. Really elaborate civilization. You see that ruin down there? That's in the Four Corners, and yeah, it's very elaborate. They built some really elaborate pueblo dwellings. Now these are some of the artwork that they left on the caves. And you see a footprint there with 6 toes. Okay, now this is actually a video. If we can get the tech guy to hit the play button for us, we'll just hear a little bit.
Told us about, and there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
So the first part that we missed, she said, there's the 6-toed footprint leading to the portal and the fallen reptilian. What is she talking about? That's from the promo video we watched in the beginning. This is the theory that the medicine man told Tom about the disappearance of these Anasazi Indians. First he gave Tom the stock answer that you'll probably hear from most scholars, and you'll read that a lot of them, there was a drought and they moved away, and some of them assimilated into the Pueblo Indians and the Hopi Indians and the Navajo, and they just kind of merged into the other tribes. But that doesn't really explain the evidence that we find. We find that they left all their stuff. They didn't just merge into the Hopis. They left their salt, they left their clothes, they left all their stuff. The other thing that archaeologists have found, they found human poop on the ground, all right? Human dung. They tested it. Within that, they found human DNA. That means that they were practicing cannibalism. Okay, now this goes hand in hand with the story that the medicine man told Tom. See, first he tells Tom the story about how they assimilated into the other tribes. He goes, I shouldn't tell you this, but if my grandfather were to tell you this story, he would have told you that a reptilian entity came from the netherworld and started teaching them sorcery and magic. And then they started practicing cannibalism and they went insane. Okay, and this reptilian entity led them all astray and they vanished. Okay, that's the story the medicine man told Tom, off the books kind of thing. All right, so that sounds a lot like this idea, that we're seeing with Nakash, right? A reptilian entity that led them all astray, led them into sin. This is the story that he told us. Now here's an anthropologist at the University of Texas saying the notion of a cosmic portal or doorway that permits translocation of shamans, spirits, and deities between worlds, levels of the cosmos, is part of the Mesoamerican cosmological tradition. So real fancy way to say that they believed that there were portals between other levels of reality, things like heaven, hell, the netherworld, the third heaven, the second heaven. These are biblical ideas, and I don't have a lot of time to unpack that, but I would do a whole nother presentation, what's a portal, and show you that there are plenty of examples of this in the Bible. Just a couple doorways that open and things come out are the ones I mentioned in the beginning. The river Euphrates, 4 angels come out. The doorway to the abyss, all these scorpion locust beings come out. The same sort of thing appears in the mythology of a lot of these Native Americans. With these Anasazi, what the medicine man told them, and a reptilian entity came through a portal and started influencing them and drove them all crazy. Same kind of thing. We found this to be really common throughout all Native American lore. And here are a lot of cave art from vastly different areas around South America and Southwest United States, where you see this vortex spiral and a horned entity, always next to each other. There's 6 examples right there from New Mexico, Utah, Arizona, all around, different tribes. Really common theme. This is a sipapu. Now, in all the kivas, these are where they did a lot of their shamanistic magic. We would call it pagan occultism in our terminology, but this is where they did their religious practices. That little hole, the second little hole you see, is kind of a symbol of what they call a sipapu, and this is a portal to another dimension. The Hopi believed they emerged from a lower level and came up into this world. And all their kivas, they put that little hole as a remembrance of where they came from. They came through a portal from another dimension, and that's really what that's for. So it's something they really believe in, and they represent it in their homes even. Now, what I found in researching this concept of portals to other dimensions and entities coming through is that this is a popular idea in paranormal literature and all this other weird stuff, and it's really hard to parse that. There's a lot of nonsense, but all of them seem to have all these weird beings. They all describe orbs. These are like these things that some people think they're ghosts, some people think they're demons. There's people that believe that this is the way angels fly about in an energetic form. There's websites with orbs flying through churches. There's a lady, I talked to her name's Joey Pinkney. She's got a website, Angel Orb Miracles. You can find it online right now, where she thinks they're good holy angels. And she shows pictures of worship services with orbs flying everywhere. I don't know about that necessarily. I think it's possible that maybe they fly around in energetic form like that. But there's something more about orbs than just dust particles. And this is what I used to think it was, just camera anomalies. But we went out to Arizona near one of these areas and set up 2 different cameras, caught them at different angles on film and video at the same time from different cameras. So it can't be just an anomaly on the lens when different cameras catch the same thing. Now, you can play this video. This is out near the Bradshaw Ranch in the desert of Arizona. You can hit play, please.
They caught her.
Okay. I think you missed the beginning.
They caught her.
Okay. Do you see that little thing fly up? It's really fast. But we slowed it down, and here it is in slow motion. You see this thing fly around, and it just kind of goes into nothing. It's really, it's hard to make anything of that, but if you were there in the context, there was something there. We caught several of them at different angles flying around. And like I said, I don't know what these are. A lot of people claim they are spirit entities. They do seem to have some intelligence. This one seemed to move evasively. But we got a lot of photographs of them, and we also caught a photograph of a strange-looking triangle UFO out there in the desert of Sedona. But there are serious people who have looked at this orb question. There's a NASA scientist who's actually looking at it. But this is the UFO that my wife caught. Does it show up good on the screen? You see the triangle? And that's a tree there on the right. I don't know what that is. Some people think that it could be a group of these balls of light flying in formation. It looks like a solid object to me. And I think it's a large triangular craft. But here's Dr. Klaus Heinemann at NASA has written a book about orbs, and he thinks they're intelligent entities. So there's something more going on than dust on the camera lens. And I did catch some on film out there in an area that's known to be one of these portal areas that the Indians talked about, and a lot of people have seen strange things out there in the desert of Sedona. So all this is, unpacked in detail in the book, On the Path of the Immortals, if you want more information. I just barely have time to scrape the surface here today. I think I'm about getting near my limit, but this is the book, On the Path of the Immortals. Tom went down to the southern part of the United States, and I went up to Arizona, and we both unpacked a lot of this Indian lore and, this belief in flying fiery serpents. And I think that it really does translate to the fallen angels accepting worship as gods. It tells you who the immortals are, so now you know what the book is about. We really are looking at these divine beings, their role in Bible prophecy and end-time Bible prophecy, and this idea of portal areas. So we think really as the tribulation approaches, these areas will become more active. We'll see more demonic beings, more beings coming through, more paranormal phenomenon, more things like these orbs. coming through, more people seeing things like ghosts and all kinds of weird things. I think that this activity will increase as the time draws near. And then in the tribulation, all hell will break loose. Okay? And, all these, locust beings and all that stuff will come up out of the ground, like it says. I think that these things are literal. And I think they're happening now already, and it's just steadily increasing. So that's what really the book covers, and it covers all these concepts, and it shows you where it appears in the Bible, too, and where you can find parallels. There are, in Isaiah 13 in the Septuagint, it talks about, open the gates, you rulers. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. What gates is he talking about? The giants are going to come through to fulfill God's wrath. And then at the end of that chapter, it talks about transgenic beings, half animal, half human, centaurs, which are like half donkey, half man. It talks about fiery flying serpents. It talks about monsters. This is in Isaiah 13. It's a judgment against Babylon, but it really seems like a portal opens and all these weird things come through, including Nephilim, apparently. But we could perhaps play the video again here, and
now we're on our way.
Now I hope it all kind of comes together.
There
you can see where we're coming from.
Images that are there.
Yeah, I saw it with the naked eye. Did you see it?
This is in the desert of Sedona.
With the naked eye. What is that?
In 2012,
there you go.
They shocked the world when they predicted Pope Benedict's resignation 1 year in advance.
Breaking news, Pope Benedict XVI announces his resignation.
Yeah, it is the first time in centuries a pope has stepped down.
And the very latest on the Pope's startling resignation yesterday, the first time in 600 years a Pope has done this.
In 2013, they uncovered the mysteries of Mount Graham, the Lucifer device, and the Vatican's secret plan for the arrival of an alien savior. For the last 24 months, Tom Horn and Cris Putnam have been working behind the scenes on their most guarded project and greatest discovery yet. Mount Graham in Arizona is said to be a portal, and the Jesuits admit they are monitoring something there that is approaching the Earth. But as the Vatican knows and the authors just uncovered, this mountain is not the only gateway to another dimension. Now, in their new book, On the Path of the Immortals,
that's the Anasazi ruins that you see Tom in front of there. They're going down into one of those Cuba areas.
Document the most astonishing evidence of those behind the veil. Armed with
that's the medicine man, Dr. Don Mose. And here he's describing
evidence of what the Bible
one of their symbols to us about these portal areas.
And the giant beings that await their time from within.
There's the Kiva hole.
They claimed that
the
they could actually conjure light.
That's Bell Rock at the background where they were waiting for the mothership.
Aliens.
So what would have caused these ancient Pueblo Anasazi Indians to have departed this area with such great haste?
We don't know why they never finished completion of the Sun Temple.
Many of them escaped right through some of these mountains, some of these old Anasazi ruins.
Travel with internationally acclaimed investigative authors of Petrus Romanus and Exo Vaticana to learn the truth behind a secret so fantastic that it took 2 years and
this is the pictographs that you saw
to document what has been kept hidden from the public
by
elitists and intellectuals who are planning mankind's assimilation under a coming savior.
Here's the six-toed giant our Indian guide told us about. And there's the fallen reptilian with the halo above his head that came through the portal.
One whom the prophet Daniel foresaw as an alien god.
Okay, you can pause it now. Stop.
On the Path of the Immortals.
Okay, so I hope that the video makes a little more sense now after you've gotten all the material, who the Immortals are and what we're talking about. Yeah, I brought a lot of these books with me on the Path of the Immortals, and I've been selling them for $20. And the thing is, I'm taking a plane back, and I can't carry all these books. I have to mail them home. So I'm going to sell them for $15 for the rest of the day. Anybody that wants to come, my book table's right out here. You can get On the Path of the Immortals for a discount. You probably won't get it at Amazon for that with shipping, so that's a good deal. I don't want to take them. I don't want to mail them back home. So please come by and pick a copy if you haven't had one. Thank you so much for coming to hear me this morning.